All right, welcome back to another episode of Project M. I am Tanner Guzzi here with Brandon King.
Hey, guys.
And today, actually, before we jump into today's topic, I got to say that we are now 4 topics in a row where you are picking the topics.
Yeah.
And I like that dynamic because, actually, I don't know why. Maybe it's because I feel like for the last 10 years, I've been trying to come up with content ideas by myself.
Okay.
And so it's really nice that to have a teammate. It's kind of like on Spider-Man where where he's like, I'm just not used to meeting people in the workplace, so don't try to kill me. There's my dad nerd moment. So okay. So today, before we jump in, housekeeping, make sure you guys listen to the last episode or saw the last video talking about the Hustle 100. Really excited about this idea, and let us know what you're doing, how it's going, especially on Instagram. You can follow us there at Enter Project M. And then make sure you use the hashtag Hustle100 so you can tell us what you're doing for your Hustle 100 and how these challenges are going and stuff like that. So with that said, what do you want to talk about today, Brandon?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, I've been thinking about a topic. I want to get your thoughts. And that's kind of why we started this in one of the reasons, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of how things have worked for us. I've thought about something, and a lot of times I can't find someone to bounce an idea off, so we sat in the car and argued about it for a little bit. And maybe this won't be an argument. Who knows?
We'll see.
Or we've talked about we discussed it.
It's a discussion more often than it's an argument.
So it's nice that we get to formalize that now, and I can.
But one day we are going to have an actual argument on these microphones.
That will be,
and it will be the best episode ever.
One day. Yeah. So what I want to talk about today is the idea of intentionality and what intentionality really means, because I don't know that I thought about the idea of intentionality before I met you.
Which is like a super buzzword right now.
Right, but I think you were an intentionality hipster a little bit. Like, you were into intentionality before. It was cool.
Yeah, riding that way a little early.
Yeah.
It's like wearing my girl pants in 2003 before guys were doing skinny jeans. Yeah. Okay. No, that's fair to say.
It's been some, but you can say that it's been a focus for you for a while.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think it's a big buzzword right now. But I think there's something that people get wrong, and that's a hypothesis I want to bounce off you today.
Cool.
So I think when a lot of people think of intentionality, that means like I'm intentionally going to think about how I raise my kids. So I'm going to send them to the best private school in my city, and that's an intentional choice I'm making as a parent because I care about my kids.
Okay.
I'm going to intentionally be very, very deliberate about about how I treat my relationship. So I'm going to go to the nicest restaurant with my wife.
Okay.
Every weekend.
Gotcha.
On and on and on. Looking at something about your life. I'm going to be intentional about fitness. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to buy, again, I'm going to
get that Equinox gym membership.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. Or I'm going to buy the whole Rogue website, and I'm going to build a shed or a warehouse in my backyard.
Yes.
And I'm going to be intentional about my fitness in
Gotcha.
that way. And I think that you can be intentional without maximizing having the best of everything. I don't think that's what intentionality is supposed to mean. I think it means that you make intentional choices, but they have to be based in reality.
Okay.
And I think when you think about the opportunity cost of everything, I think that's life. And that involves a compromise.
Totally.
Which means in some places you're not the best.
Right, and especially because a lot of people will say, well, no, because what if the goal is to make enough money, or I already make enough money that I can go to the nicest restaurants and send my kids to the best schools and have my Rogue warehouse and everything else. But it's not always just a financial thing.
It's not always a financial thing.
There's a time component of it.
And I would argue that they're the same in a lot of cases.
Okay, elaborate on that.
I mean, if you've read the books like Your Money or Your Life or Financial Freedom that just came out last year, most people, actually everybody, can tie their time to a dollar amount.
Okay.
No matter how much some people's number is bigger than others, but there's this concept of, I think they call it like your life energy units or something like that.
Okay.
Where you can add up how much money you make and how long it takes you to make $1, and you can equate that dollar to some amount of time, right? Whether that's $1 million a minute and you're, Warren Buffett or whatever.
Right, or $4 an hour.
Or $4 an hour.
Yep.
Like, you can equate some unit of time to some unit of energy, and these people I just mentioned come at it from a very, be frugal and cut your expenses so that you're not wasting your life energy, and
Right.
you can retire early. These people.
Gotcha. That's the main drive, the
that's
main
what
gist for
But
these
I think
guys,
I think the concept carries through that you can equate your money to time, and that is a compromise you're making. How big of a compromise? That depends on your ability to generate income.
Yeah.
But buying that rogue warehouse, like, you got to put some time in for that.
Right. Well, and it's funny because I think in an ironic way, this idea of maximizing in order to be intentional is in and of itself not very intentional. You're just defaulting to everything that is the maximum is the best, and that's what I need to do. So you're not really being very thoughtful about especially because how do you quantify the best between sending my kids to the most expensive private school or doing a boarding school or homeschooling, or it's more important for them to be around friends and siblings that are in the local public school?
Right.
What is the best? It's not just tied to the money, the financial aspect of it.
And I think that's what I mentioned to you when I was talking about this subject is, I think there's an example of, excuse me, a lot of people want to be intentional in their parenting. And we've talked about how great it would be if we could raise our kids, out in the middle of Montana on a 100-acre ranch, or whatever, and that's great.
But there are huge sacrifices.
There's huge sacrifices there that are out of your control, and that's why we went financial really quick, which I should have expected.
Right. But I think that's because as you were using those examples, that's where that goes. But that's just barely scratching the surface of what those compromises are.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's easy to think about it in financial terms, but when it comes to these type of decisions, you're on your 100-acre ranch in Montana. Maybe you just put your kid like out of reach of a public library, or something like that.
Or even so, I have a buddy who grew up in a small town in Idaho, and coming to the metropolis that is Salt Lake City, he hates driving downtown because he doesn't know how to do it well, and so he misses out on opportunities of doing things in the city downtown because he doesn't, he just can't handle that kind of traffic congestion, which is really not that bad compared to most other places in the world. But relative to him and his experience, that is. So what should his parents have done? Well, we're going to raise you here, but then we also need to give you X number of hours in a major city, but then we're going to travel more, but that means that you're not as rooted because you're missing out on other opportunities. Like, you're right, you can't have it all.
Right.
And intentionality is not just, I'm going to take some measure of time or finances or social status and say this is the best according to these rubrics, and then I'm just going to default to whatever, because then again you're just defaulting.
Right. Which again, I think, that may sound negative or like a downer idea, but I actually think it's good because it gives you the opportunity to kind of nerd out about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Like if you're really being intentional, like this gives you the chance to really be intentional, because it's not just it's not just a X equals 10 equation. You've got
that you don't have to think about it anymore.
I don't know if you're into this. I guess like it gives you the chance to really sit down and like weigh the consequences and see all the levers and pull. Like if I pull lever Y, what happens over here? And
I think that's really what actual intentionality is, because a lot of people, especially people who, whether you grow up in a religious community or you're part of some more dominant, you think of like the jocks versus the nerds in a high school situation or something else. And so many people reject whatever is the mainstream or whatever it was that they grew up in. And then they go to the counterculture and they adopt that part and parcel to the point where they're not being any more intentional. They're just as mindless in their adoption of the subculture as they hate and resent. And I'm speaking very much from experience with this. Let me have my green Liberty spikes and my safety pin patch battle jacket just like everybody else that looked like me and that I associated with. I wasn't being any more intentional in the punk rock crew than I accused the jocks of being when they were all wearing their Tommy Hilfiger stuff. Yeah.
So it's something that carries. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That carries across all aspects of life, right? Like your ideas, the mentality you take on. Like if you can't just like wholesale say the minimalist mentality is, or whatever, any movement, any identity that people have, right? Like you, by taking that on, you may be like wholesale hook, line, and sinker. You maybe have just left out a bunch of other ideas, ways of thinking that are also could be very beneficial to you.
And I think that's a real challenge for people, especially when it comes to things that are deep-rooted part of personas or identities or something else like that, that somehow this false house of cards has been built, and then they break away from it. You see this very often with people where they realize, that my parents they're not perfect.
Right.
And that's a lot of people grow up with the opposite. Of course, my parents are imperfect, but a lot of kids grow up with this idea of my parents were perfect, and then you get to the reality of they're not, and then you just abandon everything about them.
Right.
And just because my parents said something, that now automatically means that it was wrong. And it's
Right.
like, no.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they were perfect or they were entirely imperfect. They got some things right as you were growing up or whatever it may be. And so you're right. If you go from I'm total a consumption geek to a minimalist and you jump from one identity to another, you're not really being any more intentional, and you're missing out on opportunities and benefits from being able to say, there's, and I think one thing that we need to be wary of with this is this doesn't mean that the ideal is moderation to its own extreme.
Right.
Because even then you find yourself in the same predicament of I'm just going to be the middle of the road no matter what, because that's a safe. But again, it's defaulting, and it's just I think we can attribute it to laziness. But even more so, I think we can attribute it to fear.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, because it's scary to have to think about the weight of things.
Yeah.
As opposed to, okay, what are the consequences?
Right.
What if they were right? What if I'm wrong? What if this? What are the trade-offs that I have to make from this? As opposed to, no, my plan A is going to work.
Yeah.
Or this is now my new mindset, my new tribe, my new identity, and I can just embrace this and not have to think about it.
Or a lot of times, I think it's scary. I know personally it's scary when I look at these trade-offs I have to make, and I say, I'm not willing to make some of these trade-offs. Well, I've got to step it up if I want both of these things, right? Which I think is almost equally as scary. Knowing maybe a lot of times I think that is financial. Okay, I can have my awesome gym in my backyard and I can have my Mercedes out front.
But you're going to have to make more money.
But I'm going to have to make more money.
Yeah.
And what does that take? And you've got to really... And then you've got
how much is your I hope that this is not this isn't throwing her under the bus, but I find myself doing that all the time where I'm trying to be, and I think a lot of this is how I was raised, but I find myself trying to be reasoned about things like this, and then my wife will just say, you just make more money, that's the solution.
No, I've heard your wife tell me that.
Right, you have heard her tell, and I find myself actually appreciating that, because a lot of times we do, as part of this intentionality, is we only get X deep in it, where we think, okay, I can control 3 levers, and you really have 19 that you can pull. And so I'm sitting here trying to figure out what's the right balance based on these 3 levers, and then she'll remind me, it's you got more you can play with here.
Yeah, and I think, what was I going to say? But I think that also, with that comes more levers, right? You've got to think, I could start another business. I could, whatever it is, I could put in more hours. I could do overtime, whatever that more money is to get.
Right.
But there's
trade-offs there.
Set of trade-offs.
Exactly.
What's the time you're spending? What's the stress? Whatever. And
how does it affect your family?
Yeah.
Are you as present with your kids? How is it from your own stress levels?
Right.
Or and I think one of the things that's really sad about this is that we can start to present it in that way of, we can go too far in that direction, where everything has trade-offs, and I can't have a great relationship and a good business and be in shape and be intellectually and spiritually and in all these other ways the way I want to be. But in a lot of ways, those things can be incredibly synergistic.
Oh, yeah,
and you get 2 or 3 of those levers in sync, and then the other things start to rise up with it, and it works incredibly well. So even that idea of everything has to come with an opportunity cost can be unintentional and can be damaging.
And that's not the point I want to make here, is that you shouldn't try so hard because you can't have everything. That's not what I wanted to say.
Not at all. No.
I'm just saying, you got to be realistic about it.
Yeah, and I would say realistic while still being ambitious.
For sure.
Yeah.
And trying, I think the whole idea of intentionality is that you do look at where you want to focus. What do you care about? It all comes down to that. And you should care about a lot of things, and you should be trying to optimize those things in the measure that you care about them.
So do you think that, let's see the right way to ask this. I think a lot of times this idea of intentionality is something that is appealing to more thinker types, more intellectual types. Do you think in a lot of ways, is it possible that people will use this, and even what we're talking about, where it's okay, I got to look at all the consequences, and I got to see, 4 or 5 steps down the road. Do you think there are people who use that as an excuse to just not act?
For sure. No, and I know I've done that, right? Again, when you see these things and you look at the trade-offs and you look at what they are, I think a lot of times we make the cons bigger than they really are, and it's paralyzing, right? Like, but I think that's the part you've got to be intentional about is you have to be intentional about pushing past your fears, or just seeing the costs and knowing what they are, but still, I guess that's the hard part, right? Is being real about the costs of any given decision, and then deciding whether it's worth it.
Yes.
And I know that's been my challenge. It's like I know there's things that I could be doing to optimize that would open up some levers for me. But yeah, I mean, they're scary. They're hard.
They are scary, but I think that even that starts to change as you go and you have both more failures and more successes.
For sure.
Because you realize that the failures aren't nearly as big of a deal as you think they are. I just got an invoice for duties for a business that I had planned on starting with the kids.
Okay.
That basically killed all my potential profits, right? Yeah. So obnoxious. So now I'm a few grand into this stupid project that's probably not going to make any fruition. And I can look at this as just like, why did I do this? This is so dumb. Things were going well, but I can recover from that. It's really not the end of the world. And then even irrespective of the lessons learned as far as, okay, well, now I know I need to plan this better or work with another supplier better, or I need to wait until the kids are older, or we can do. More importantly is the affirmation that it's like, okay, you screwed that up.
Right.
You did, and there were real costs for it, and nobody died.
Yeah.
It's not that big of a deal. You're way more resilient than you think you are.
Will you be kicking yourself for it for a while?
No, I'll just pay it today and I'll be fine. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I didn't used to always be that way.
Yeah.
I used to be very much kick myself for it for a long time. But I think resilience is a skill.
Right.
And the more you fail and the more because you have to succeed along with the failures. Right. But the more you just experience both of those, then the more you can you develop that skill of being able to be resilient about stuff.
Yeah.
Part of it is it would be very different if it were a $30,000 bill. Yeah. Then I would be kicking myself about it. And so part of it is the scale as well. But yeah, and it's the same thing where I have days where I'll screw up with, I'm not intentional about how I am with my kids because they should have been in bed an hour ago. They're having a hard time sleeping. I just want to relax. And so I'm more short than I need to be. I'm not beating my kids.
Right.
And so I do feel a little bit guilty. And then I just realize it as an opportunity where it's like, okay, you failed as a father. And even the ability to admit that is kind of hard because that doesn't mean I am a failure as a father, but it means I failed as a father in that regard. Okay, let's recover from that. Let's do better. Let's be more intentional as opposed to just reactive. Right. The next time they come out and they're interrupting my time they're messing with my plans or how I think things ideally should be.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so the other part of this that I was thinking about is... how do I think about intentionality when I do make these trade-offs, and what's my mindset? So I don't know if you're familiar with Colin Wright. I think I've sent you his podcast.
I'm familiar. Yeah,
he's got a podcast called Let's Know Things. He came to Salt Lake, and I went and watched him speak, and there weren't very many people there, and he opened up for questions. But one of his key tenets that he talked about in his talk was intentionality, and I asked him this question: like, how do you be intentional in a world where you often have to compromise or there's an opportunity cost? And one of the tips he gave is optimize for flexibility, which I thought was an interesting idea. Is if you have to optimize, if you have to go down a path and commit to something, maybe think about committing to a path that opens up more doors than so like, for example, moving to Montana may not be like one of those paths because it's hard to come. Maybe you buy a property that's hard to sell, like you're in that, right? Like, maybe think about going down a path intentionally that either you can turn around and come back from.
Do you think most people can handle that? Or do you think that creates more of a paradox of choice where they're limited? I think a lot of people thrive in situations where they're limited.
Where they're locked in.
When you can go into a burger place and you can either get a hamburger or a cheeseburger. And you can get a chocolate shake or a vanilla shake. Or you go into a place like Cheesecake Factory and you're screwed because there's so many decisions.
I don't think it's so much as opening a lot of doors right away, but just allowing yourself to change your mind in the future.
Okay.
Which I thought was interesting.
That is interesting, especially because that's what one of our friends' wives, Kenzie, that's what she's talked about multiple times. Her dad taught her that, where if you're trying to make a decision and it's not a moral decision, make the decision that leads to the ability to make more decisions.
Right.
Yeah. Which I do. I think that there's a lot of power in that.
Right.
Again, provided that people don't take it to the point where they allow themselves to be paralyzed by the new dearth of decisions or options that they can
themselves.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is interesting is when I met you, we lived in a pretty unique situation in terms of the demographics we were surrounded by. Let's just say there were some people there that were, how would you put them in? Maybe not thriving economically.
Yes.
Is that fair to say?
So we were in an apartment complex, and it was a newer apartment complex, and all the other buildings around us were basically, it was low income housing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we met with a lot of these people, and great people.
Absolutely.
Awesome people in there. But a lot of the times, I don't know about you, but I would look at these people and just say, if you would just step back, like take a couple steps back, get this, not even from like a 30,000 foot view, but just like
a 30-foot view.
Give yourself a 30-foot view and just see like I know you feel trapped in your call center job right now, but if you could just like take a few steps back, like take an online course or something like that, there is an easy path out of here.
Right.
Where if you're unhappy, right? And I think a lot of them were.
And they were, and what's so hard is because they would then go from, and they're so justified in feeling this way, which is hard because it doesn't help them, but they hate their jobs, they're not making enough money, and so they turn to some form of escape, whether that's crap food or stimulants or depressants or just junk TV, but it's basically consumption and escapism.
Yeah, some sort of self-medication.
Right, and it's like if you could just, you're right, if you could just have a little bit more drive, discipline, or even just a little bit, because I don't think a lot of these people lacked drive or discipline, but even just if they just had a little bit more, I don't know, faith in themselves, a little bit more understanding of how close to being able to remove themselves from those situations they were, if they had a little bit more validation as opposed to, this is the environment my family raised me in, this is what normal is, or anything else, because you're right, they were so close to, it wasn't that 30,000 foot view. It was that 30-foot view to get them out of that and break that routine.
Yeah. So I think about that a lot. And we've talked about this before too. Like we've talked about, you've had people tell you that it's impossible to make like a certain amount of money on the internet. I forgot what it was. And we said, well, we know that's possible, but probably 5 years ago, we may have been one of those people that says, you can't make $100K on the internet or whatever it is. And so I think, and we talked about this, like how much am I like those people in those apartments, right? Where I say, I guess I should bring this back to intentionality. Like I look at that and I say, if you set a goal, like looked at where you wanted to be, look at where you were now, like that's an easy line to draw, right? And I think about those people a lot because I think about, well, if I just leveled, put myself up in the air a couple feet.
Right, because you're now comfortable at a 30-foot view.
Yeah, sure.
Or even a 300-foot view.
Yeah.
But can you step out to an even bigger picture?
Yeah, like what lines would I draw, right? And so I think that's the big thing about intentionality is like, you can't just be intentional about what you want, like what makes me happy, right? Like there's got to be some sort of like destination of who you want to be.
Right.
And
well, and I think that's why one of the most important things to be intentional about is the people that you surround yourself with.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's so hard when you are in that same field of vision as everybody else, but then as soon as you step out and you get around people who are just like, no, this is not how we do things.
Right.
And you see how, in a lot of ways, automatic it is for them to not have to do things because it's now their default because they were doing it intentionally or somebody 3 generations ago was. But it makes it a whole lot easier to just say, oh, okay, I'm way closer to this than I thought I was. Yeah. Right, which is one of the whole reasons why we're doing this project. You and I can feed off of each other that way. That's why we have the rut. Right. Is so that we're surrounded by men who are they're making the right things that we want to be priorities priorities. And that's all this idea with challenges and everything else is to be, whether that's in real life or even just digitally, surrounded by people who do live intentionally, and it makes it less scary because you see other people who are either right there on the same journey with you or they're 1 or 2 steps ahead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the big challenge as part of this, right? Is it's hard to get access to those people sometimes that are just crushing it in the sense that we would call it.
Right. Because it's not even, and it's certainly not a financial thing, because how many people will spend their morning commute to their call center job driving in and listening to the morning talk show where they're doing fart noises and everything else, as opposed to a podcast or an audiobook or something else. And this is based on, even an episode that we did a couple episodes ago where you just start off by listening to the book or reading the book, and then you start to build off of your intention. Right. But even to go from the morning zoo show to I'm going to listen to some sort of self-development audiobook or a podcast, which is free, there's some intentionality required, and there are opportunity costs in that because it's harder. You may not retain everything, or it may be that if somebody else is in your car and they hear you they give you a hard time that because you're listening to it as opposed to the fun stuff or anything else. Yep.
But definitely a case like you don't know what you don't know type thing where you may not even know what you should be shooting for, or what is in your realm. That's something I could definitely use some more of.
Yeah. So that's because that's interesting because we have our realms in which we can on our own develop more intentionality, but then in a lot of regards, being able to kind of break out into the next one requires associating with somebody else,
some sort of mentorship.
Exactly, whether that's virtual or not. That's what I do for coaching. I take guys who are in this realm where they have some level of intentionality with their clothes because they're not just they don't look like they're homeless. They're not wearing their wives' clothes or anything else like that. But they don't know how to get to a better and higher level of intentionality, and so I can pull them up to where they need to be, and we can do the same thing in any regard.
Right. Yeah. So something again I mentioned to you is that I think a big argument against this is, well, Brandon, you're just you have a scarcity mindset because
you can't have it all.
You can have it all. If you had an abundance mindset, you would see you can have everything.
Okay. Become a god, Brandon.
Do you think there are people that I don't know? Maybe there are people that can have it all. I don't know.
Maybe no.
I actually don't think so.
I don't think so because I think it's a tricky thing because you do have to acknowledge that we are finite beings, and you can't, at least to our current understanding of it, you can't run a sub-2 marathon and then the next day go and deadlift 1,000 pounds.
Right.
There are trade-offs there.
Right.
There are genetics, there are training, there are nutrition, there are so many other trade-offs there.
Right.
You can't put in 100 hours a week at the office and then be able to be active and involved with your kids' lives and maintain your health because you're getting enough sleep and doing these other things. So there are certainly trade-offs.
So how much of it, I'm going to reverse roles of what we typically do. So how much of it is financial? Just if say you had, I don't know,
limitless funds.
Yeah.
There's still the time component of it.
Money.
There's still the energy component or the attention component or anything else. I don't think that money makes a lot of those problems disappear, especially because you can outsource a lot of those things.
Right.
But it doesn't. You still can't have it all. Because again, look at people like Zuckerberg or look at other. That's why people will say money can't buy happiness.
Right.
It's people who are wealthy and they're doing really well, but their relationships suck, or the way that they see themselves and the way that they fit in the world sucks, or they feel like things are empty or vacuous or anything else. And money can't it doesn't solve those kinds of problems.
Right.
So I don't think that it's just financial. I think there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah, I think the easy ones are financial, right? The easy ones to solve. But when it comes down to, not just what do you want to buy, what do you want to have, what type of, material lifestyle you want to live, but the harder decisions like how you're raising your kids, what you want to teach them, what you want to put your time into, how you want to develop.
How are you going to stand by your principles?
Which are really the more important decisions, I would argue.
And that's where because money, and I think Casey Neistat did a video about this a couple years ago where he talks about having money solves money problems.
Right.
It really does because and they're real problems. If my son were to break his arm and we didn't have insurance or didn't have money to pay for it, that's a real problem that can very easily be solved by money.
Yeah.
But if my son is totally resentful of me and we're incapable of connecting with each other, and I spend all my time resenting him, you can't throw money at that kind of a problem.
Which is interesting, and maybe that's a good way to think about it. As you're weighing your priorities, it might be good to separate which of these would be solved by money, which of these wouldn't be solved by money.
Right. Put your money towards the money problems.
Right. And which of them? I think some of them are a little bit of both.
Right.
Some personal or improvement things do require.
Right, because if you can outsource some things, then it gives you more time to be able to focus attention on the other things that require more time and attention and that kind of stuff.
Right, or maybe like if your goal is to run marathons or whatever, and that's something you want to develop personally, like that's something you've got to work for.
Right.
But you've got to pay for them. Like it's maybe not a huge cost, like race entries,
but it is from a time perspective.
Yeah, and that's what I'm talking. That's a time commitment.
Right. Which is easier if you don't have to work.
Easier if you don't have to work. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly.
Or easier if you don't have to sleep as much. But it's also easier if you just have the discipline to get up early and go do that kind of stuff.
So I think that's a good example of like a mixed one.
Yep.
Relevant to you because you just ran. And I know that actually I didn't think about this when I did a couple. I like spreadsheets. a couple weeks ago, I was feeling a little bit lost. So I went through and I was like, all right, what are the things that I want like right now? And I put them out in my spreadsheet. And then I started, because I was thinking, it was a shallow moment. Say it was a shallow moment. I started putting dollar amounts on the next column. And I got to some of it like, there's not a dollar. This doesn't correspond to money.
Which is what a cool way to actually come to that conclusion.
It was interesting.
I don't think that's a shallow moment. I think that's just the ability to step out of what your realm is.
It was a shallow moment in that my intention was to put a dollar amount on each of them.
No, but even then, just the exploration of that, the intentionality of that,
right.
I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Sum this all up for us. No pressure.
Intentionality is important. You need to pick things that are important to you and work on them. You need to realize which ones have trade-offs and which ones don't. And you need to weigh those trade-offs, which levers you're going to pull as you're making the decisions. You need to act on them, and you'll be better off. Awesome. Okay. If you guys let us know how your relationship is with intentionality. Were you hipsters like I was? or is this something that's been a recent revelation for you? But I would love to know what kind of trade-offs you guys have had to make and what makes you feel like, what are the kind of things that you feel like are more synergistic? Because the trade-offs are really easy to acknowledge. But I think one of the things that's really interesting are the synergy things. How much better are you as a father because you're in better shape? Or how much more money can you make because you are better in your relationships with people or those kind of things? The synergy component, I think, is one of the things that's really interesting. So let us know where you guys are on that. Yeah. And we'll talk to you guys on the next episode. See you guys.